We are pleased today to have Dr. Ricky Jones from the University of Louisville. Dr. Jones, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
You're a special person, and I did not want to miss the opportunity for the community to be able to hear more from Dr. Jones in terms of where he was coming from on an array of issues. Dr. Jones, a little bit about your background. Raised by your grandmother,
Right.
In a Section 8 housing complex area?
The actual housing projects, we didn't get Section 8 until I was a senior in college. So my grandmother's from rural Georgia, just south of Macon, never went to school, died in 2009, virtually illiterate. My mother had me when she was 15 years old. Wow. I didn't meet my father until I was around 35 or so. So obviously no 15-year-old is really prepared to be a mother. So my grandmother stepped in and raised me. So don't know what I would have been without that woman.
I think that's important for people to understand. You succeeded Blaine Hudson at the University of Louisville. Tell me about Blaine and how that relationship affected your leadership today.
Well, you know, there are a few men, as a guy growing up without a father, you know, I heard a really interesting story some years ago about fatherless children, and some of them really get eaten up by the system as they go along. But then others who are successful become fiercely independent, very resilient, but another thing they do, they adopt fathers as they go along. And you do it without thinking about it. And I realized I've been doing that since I was in about the 8th grade. And so Blaine Hudson really became one of the fathers that I adopted in my journey. Now, I came to the University of Louisville because of Robert Douglas, who also hired Blaine in the Department of Pan-African Studies. And a lot of people don't know Bob Douglas's story because Blaine became the first African-American dean in the College of Arts and Sciences. He's the second African-descended dean. There was a fellow by the name of Victor Olorunzela who was there long before I got there, and then there was Blaine. But you know, I came to Louisville because of Bob. I stayed in Louisville because of Blaine, I think, as well as Bob. Humble man, brilliant, always looked to help others, you know, and very, very in tune with the times, and also had the foresight to understand what was coming. And so what I adopted from him, people think I'm you know, half crazy now, I guess, you know, fiery, but I was a lot less calm before I met Blaine. So he not only helped me as a professional, he also helped me as a person, you know, developing as a human being. So when we lost him, that was a tough loss. That was a tough loss. I shed a lot of tears over losing him.
You run a much different ship than Blaine did in terms of your outreach and in terms of your strong opinions. I'm not here to judge those opinions. I'm just saying it's a very different model than Blaine had. Has anyone ever called you out on that and said, wait a minute, this is not how this goes, and Pan-African Studies is not about the matters that you're drifting into? Or have they encouraged you and said, yes, this is exactly what a PhD in Pan-African Studies in our leadership element should be doing?
Well, there are a couple of things. One is a misperception that Blaine wasn't as opinionated as I am. The ship isn't run that much different than him. The styles are different. You know, Blaine, my nickname for him was the Velvet Hammer, right? So he came across a little bit different, but he was very opinionated. Remember, Blaine was kicked out of the University of Louisville for protesting when he was an undergrad, had to fight his way back in. He was on such a bad side of the administration that one of the deans at the school told him, you know, that he would never work at Louisville, he would never move forward there. And he ended up, you know, becoming a professor, the chair of Pan-African Studies, and then the dean. So people forget about Blaine's overarching story. Blaine Hudson was a revolutionary from the time he was a teenager to the time he died, right? But his approach, his style was just cooler. That's all that is.
Yeah. Velvet Hammer.
Yeah, beautiful. The Velvet Hammer. So,
beautiful. So
the way we run the department, what we think the department is about, it's not different at all. Black studies did not come out of the same intellectual tradition as English or history or, you know, some of your standards. It came out of the protest movement of the 60s, where students were demanding that Black studies exist. And so there's this idea in Black studies that we exercise, 1, academic excellence, but 2, social responsibility. You can be the smartest person in the world, but if you're doing work that nobody's paying attention to and you're not trying to change the world, then what good are you? So Blaine Hudson and I share that. And so do people push back against that? Yeah, people push back against that, and that's good. Look, my thought is this. There's so many short-sighted people who are drunk with power, drunk with influence, drunk with money, drunk with marginalization in this world. If I'm not pissing some of them off, then I'm doing something wrong. So, you know, I'm not one who shrinks from those types of battles. I'm not one who worries about hate mail. I actually welcome it. If I ain't getting hate mail, then I ain't pushing hard enough.
Doctor, in Louisville, it seems like, unfortunately, there's more bad than good in terms of racial relations. I'm not sure if that's a product of media or if that's a product of what's really happening. What is your assessment of race relations in Louisville right now?
I don't think Louisville's race relations are any better or any worse than most places in this country. You know, when you talk to people, certainly people of color and their allies across lines of race, and you go to their particular spaces, they'll tell you about their cities. Oh, this city is messed up. You know, this town is messed up, because that's what they know. So people in Louisville, they know Louisville. So it's not that it's worse. It's certainly not good, but it's better than it's been, and it can be better. But it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure, whether we're talking about, you know, race, whether we're talking about gender, sexual orientation, religious choice, all of those things, that nobody is made to feel less than because they belong to another group in society.
Are the police forces in America, are they inherently racist?
I think people in America are inherently racist. Racism is America's original sin. And all of us have to grapple with racism. All of us have to grapple with implicit bias. Just like we have to inherently deal with the paternalism and the gender discrepancies in America, with the patriarchy in America, the misogyny in America. You're seeing so many of these things come to the fore now with the spate of sexual harassment cases being brought to the fore, right? Where women have been mistreated for so long, and nobody would say anything, and they were afraid to say something because they didn't think they'd be heard. So these things are real. Racism is real. Sexism is real. You know, discrimination along lines of religious choice, that stuff is real.
Let's take our police force, for example, in Louisville. Do you feel like there's an undercurrent of racism within our police force right now?
Oh, that's a question that backs you into a corner, but when you see the disproportionate
I don't want to back you into a corner.
No. I mean, when you see the disproportionate incarceration of African Americans, which certainly is here
in
Louisville as well, I think people have these conversations and they're too bifurcated, they're too narrow. And in a very elementary way, we can make the argument, oh, police are just bad. I'm not making an argument that police are bad. I think most police do their jobs and do their jobs well. But certainly we have some that do not. And I do think that we have people that have structural institutional predispositions to target particular groups. And so I think it would be disingenuous of me to say that we don't struggle with that problem in the same way in Louisville as many other forces around the country do. So the question becomes, what are we going to do about it, right? Are we going to have an honest, humane, decent conversation about it to preserve the lives of citizens so that we don't have some citizens feeling like they're being protected, other citizens feeling like they're being harassed, and we can try to build better communities? Or are we going to double down and say, oh, well, no, nothing is wrong with the police, nothing at all, there's nothing to see here, there's no racism, there's no implicit bias, there's no marginalization, there's no discrimination there, it's just on these communities. Same thing in higher ed, where I work. Why do we have such a small number of African American professors, right? In business, in banking, in politics, why do you have the numbers discrepancies that you have? And so if we don't pay attention to that and deal with it honestly, then we have a problem.
In one of your columns a few weeks ago, we talked about, or you were speaking to something that I'm interested in hearing more about, and that is when an individual's parents die and where that money goes and how wealth is passed down, and that therefore there's a disadvantage to the African American community because there's not wealth that's being passed down. School me a little bit on what the point was there.
You misread that column.
Okay.
Yeah, you misread that column. Now, there certainly is a racial dynamic when you talk about income and wealth. Average white family in the country right now makes just over $50,000 a year.
This was the nature of this was inheritance, and how it kept walls up.
Well, no, it was one point of it. The general thesis of the piece was why it was talking about our fascination with the rich and why that is unhealthy. That's not a racial argument, though. That is an argument across lines of race. Now, for some folk, and I know this will be a shock to some people, but the majority of white people in the country are not rich. You know, some people think that all white people are rich. They are not. There's a lot more white poor than white rich, right? And so this argument has no color to it. But that argument was running back using the situation of John Schneider as an example, but not centering on him. I'm simply saying that we have to, I think, as as middle class, as working class people, try to tear down some of these walls and myths that because people are wealthy, they somehow are more talented than other folk. No, you can be very good at making money, right? But not be a very good person. You can be very good at making money in one area of life, but not be capable of handling things in another area of life. And that's why I keep coming back to this argument over and over again, for instance, about the University of Louisville, which is a local concern, but it's also a concern in higher ed across the country, where we're seeing boards of trustees continuously and more increasingly populated by businessmen and lawyers because they've been financially successful, but they don't know anything about higher education. And they quite often have sensibilities that run counter to the higher education mission, but people trust them simply because they're rich. And I'm saying that is a flaw. And if we don't get out of it, it is going to lead us down some very, very dangerous paths.
Presidential search at the University of Louisville, open or closed?
It's closed right now. It should be open. It should be open. I mean, it should be, because what you have right now, Larry, and this is a very serious question, not just for faculty, staff, and students at the University of Louisville, not just for alumni of the University of Louisville or fans of Louisville sports, but anybody who cares about this city and cares about this state. If you look around this country, thriving cities always have thriving universities. You know, again, from New York to Atlanta to Charlotte to LA. The University of Louisville is a very important engine in delivering members of the professional class to the city of Louisville and the state of Kentucky. So the health of this state is dependent upon the health of higher education in this state. So there have been a number of things that have happened. First of all, for people who pay attention, and people are upset right now. Some folks are upset because, you know, of the loss of Rick Pitino. Other folks are upset because of the loss of Tom Jurich, who's a friend of mine. But I'm not talking about sports right now. You know, that's the sexy part of it.
Did you speak up for Tom?
I did. I did speak up for Tom, and I'll continue to speak up for Tom. I think Tom was a good man. I think he was mistreated. But it's easy to get caught in that argument and miss the larger point. We have a board of trustees that was illegally appointed by the governor of this state in the person of Matt Bevin. No one person should appoint an entire board of trustees at one time. And there were laws against that, which the Republican legislature went back and changed to make this okay. The University of Louisville's accrediting agency, SACS, came in and placed us on academic probation, right? Our accreditation is under review right now because of political interference. They said this looks like political interference, and it is. But you have these 10 people that the governor came in and appointed at one time to say that they're the only people outside of the three, you know, the faculty rep, the student rep, and the staff rep. These are 10 people who are saying we're the only ones who have the right to know who every candidate is, every finalist is, and the final person who will be president of the University of Louisville.
But doesn't the governor get props for bringing in new blood?
No.
And obviously what was in some areas
no.
Not so good?
No, because that was a lie from the beginning. To make an argument that the last board of trustees was dysfunctional because the last board of trustees had healthy debate about some of the things that were going on with the previous administration, that's a false argument from the beginning. To my understanding, the current board has 4 or 5 members who are against this closed presidential search. So does the governor now come back in and say this board is dysfunctional because they don't unanimously agree that they should have a secret search for the next president of the University of Louisville? You understand the wrong-headedness of it?
Right? Well, I understand your point. I do not agree, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, that's
okay. I want to hear your point.
My point is this. We're not Walmart greeters at the University of Louisville, okay? You have a population of people who are thinking people, and a good percentage of the core people have doctorates, okay?
Such as yourself.
Right. The professors and the students are the ones that are the core populations of the University of Louisville or any other university.
You going to let the students pick the president?
No, that's not the point. But I'm saying that the students should have a vote. They should know who the presidential candidates are. The faculty, the staff, they should have a vote. They should know who the presidential candidates are. And let me say this. This argument about closed searches being best practices, let me be very, very clear. That is a lie. That is a lie.
What's the purpose of that lie?
The purpose of the lie, to my thinking, is that you can have a small cadre of people, again, in this board of trustees, who feel that they are the only people who should know, think, or decide. It is problematic. Now, let's make this simple. You can like UofL or not. You can like Jim Ramsey, the past president, or not. You can like Rick Pitino, Tom George, anybody or not. Nobody will make an argument that the University of Louisville has not had problems with transparency, right, in the recent past. Nobody would say that the university has not had problems with malfeasance in the recent past, with all of this secrecy. Even if every president of our university had been chosen secretly in the past, this is a moment with the deficit in trust that we have across the board, from people who work there to people who support the school. It seems that folks are making decisions that are untoward and rigged. This would be the moment to have an open democratic search. And for people to make the argument, oh, you can't get a good candidate out of that, look right up the road at the school I went to for graduate school at the University of Kentucky. Eli Capilouto, and I don't know if you know him.
No,
Fabulous.
Have met him.
Fabulous president. And he is the product of an open search.
All right.
So this argument's a lot.
Let's keep moving in the interest of time. Doctor, do you ever feel like you're contributing to inflammatory statements that get people upset?
You've asked me that question a few times. And I guess you want me to say yes. So, yeah. And if I'm upsetting people that have undemocratic tendencies, good. If I'm upsetting people who want to be secretive, good. If I'm upsetting people who engage in bullying behavior, good. If I'm inflaming people who want to ruin people's careers and lives, good. If I'm inflaming people who want to rule by fear and knocking folks around the chessboard like they're pawns and not respecting them, good. If I'm pushing people to the limit and pissing them off, if they want to handle people like they're their bosses and they're peons and they're serfs instead of handling them like they're partners and they're worthwhile human beings, then good. So do I piss them off? Yeah. Have I pissed them off enough? No, but I'm still relatively young and I got a little bit more time to do so.
Well, thank you for being here, Dr. Ricky Jones. It is a privilege to have Dr. Jones here at Bisig TV, and hope we all learned something today. And Dr. Jones, you're a credit to this community, and I'm grateful to have you here today, and I'm grateful, and maybe we all learned a little something. Thank you, sir.
My dear brother,
Appreciate
it warms
it.
my heart.